Hello, BookTube. We're continuing with my library tour. We're doing this tall west wall bookcase, and it is hugely concentrated on bookish books. Books, books about publishing, and especially collections of reviews and essays. So if you're not interested in that, there's going to be precious little here to interest you. But we're going to do this next shelf. This one does have transwise books, but I'm just going to pop them up into the open space of the above shelf rather than make a mess. So let's see. I imagine that's all that this is going to be, is just collections of reviews. Yep, this is Marion King's book, Books and People. This is a terrific book for the librarians out there. This is she worked forever at the New York Public Library, and back a million years ago, and this is about her adventures with the library and all the bookish people, the authors who came and went. What have we got here? After almost 50 years of quiet service and observation at the desk of New York's oldest library, the New York Society Library. Oh no, I'm sorry, not the New York Public Library, the New York Society Library, which still exists. You can still go in and get a tour. Marion King has written a delightful, informative chronicle of her experiences and impressions, and it's published to coincide with the 200th anniversary of the library, and that was quite some time ago. When was this? 1954. Not exactly. Where am I going to put this? Not exactly a collection of reviews, but still very bookish. Still a library, and you could fill a bookcase twice this size with charismatic library books as well. Okay, all right. This is a collection of literary squibs and humorous asides. This is The Literary Life and the Hell with It by Whit Burnett, who specializes in this sort of thing. Very, very literate person. I would love it if there were a volume of his collected book reviews as well. I don't think there was, but I'd need to be. I'm not an antiquarian, a book authority at all. I would have to research and find out. He wrote, in addition to these humorous squibs, I'm glad these were collected, but in addition to these, he also, of course, like everybody else, wrote book reviews. This was in the 1930s, 1939. He was the editor of Story magazine, but long before then, and even during that time, like I say, it's an irresistible thing. It always has been. An editor, you achieve a certain amount of either prominence in the literary world or reputation for being able to turn around readable work. And you get an editor who says, well, I have a book and I want you to review it. Or can I send you 5 books? And can we sort of informally agree that you'll do at least 3 of them? And the trade-off was purely economical. It was that you either got a small amount of money for doing that, or if you were lucky enough, if you got in good with a couple of places that really paid, then you'd get a non-small amount of money. $100 back then was your rent plus food. Or you got no money, but you got the byline and you got to keep the books, which you could then immediately resell to any of New York City's 150 bookstores. For a long time, that was inducement enough for writers. This was in the days before writers just automatically had, I don't know, writer-in-residence gigs, paid writer-in-residence gigs, paid teaching gigs, lecture tours, informal writing seminars, all that kind of stuff. This is long before that. So if you were the best-selling author in the country, then you might get a teaching gig out of that, but usually not. And otherwise, it was a perfect way to get a little money coming in. So everybody did it, including this guy, and he did a lot of it. So it'd be great if somebody would find those and collect those, especially since we're either running out of time to do that for a lot of these authors, especially the unknown ones, or we're out of time already, because these things appeared in small regional newspapers, and in most cases, no one has thought to preserve those newspapers. No one has thought to preserve the back issues. For every one that's on cumbersome microfiche, there are 20 or 30 that no one bothered to save at all. So that work is disappearing. Anyway, now that we have the internet, that is less likely to happen. I should say that is less likely to happen. The internet circulates all around. Every time you pass along a link or save a link, There are all sorts of internet hubs that save stuff, just routinely save everything, snapshot and save everything. So to the point where writing for a print journal of any kind, a print venue of any kind that doesn't have that, is starting to me to feel like hollering down a well. I remember the internal pang I felt when the Wethersfield Proctor Library and Mark Richardson, the director of the Wethersfield Proctor Library, floated the idea of a column for the library newsletter, which at the time, the very first time the idea was floated to me, the library newsletter had no electronic version. It was just this thing that was printed and distributed. Then I thought, no, that means it's dead. That means it's gone. It has to have an electronic. I've got to be able to show it to people. I've got to be able to keep it. It's got to be findable in 100 years. Of course, none of us knows that is true. We don't know that any of this stuff will be findable or readable in 100 years. I have no idea. I just recently was cleaning out one of the few repositories of just miscellaneous junk here at Hyde Cottage, a big drawer in a bureau the other day. And at the bottom, I came across a disc with the sliding metal window. Do some of you remember that? An actual disc, not a floppy disk, but like something out of Star Trek, the plastic ones that had the sliding metal window that opened when you shove it into a machine. That window opened and gave the machine access to the whatever you call it on the inside. And that disc was full of stuff. I know something of what's on that disc. There's almost a whole novel and an enormous number of letters. And I don't have any machine that can even begin to read that sort of thing. It requires a physical insertion in a device. I don't have anything that'll even come close to doing that. I'd be willing to bet that the only place in Boston where I would find anything that would be able to read that thing would be at a computer museum. Literally a museum piece. And even then, I don't know if the reading material, the reading software would be the same as the kind that you would need to read it. So I don't know. None of us knows. But anyway, a long digression, just to say that just to circle all the way back around to the fact that I really need to make books of my reviews. I really do. I need to go through it. Many of you have offered to help me to go through these reviews, add all sorts of material to them, and make books. Many books, so that even if they're not printed books, at least they're out there. Anyway, what is it? Okay. This is George Hamilton Fitch. This is his Comfort Found in Good Old Books. This is a wonderful, wonderful volume where he goes through the mainstays of the Western canon. And he does it because these were columns that he wrote when his son, as he put it, his best friend, unexpectedly died. And he really was driven back to his books for comfort, just to get through life, just to get through the day. And these are wonderful. And this old volume is wonderful too. It even has, I wonder if I could show you. It has wonderful illustrations, black and white illustrations, all throughout. He goes through Shakespeare and the Bible and Milton and The Imitation of Christ. Just wonderful, wonderful stuff. Really a good reminder of how much books can mean. And in all circumstance. Oh, okay, all right, here's another old book. This is Obiter Dicta. This is Augustine Birrell. I don't know when this was made. I don't have all of his literary writing. I wish I did. This was 1893, and it has Milton, Pope, Johnson, Burke, Charles Lamb, Emerson, and a couple of other things, a couple of general interest pieces about reading or about the role of reading. I wish I had the first series, but he's very interesting to read even now. This is, like I mentioned, this is a bookcase that I come back to. I come to this bookcase and just sort of pull books off and stand here, shifting weight from one foot to the next. I've done that forever. I was doing it just the other day. I was doing it. I was standing at this particular shelf, looking through a bunch of these things for possible thoughts on a new review that's coming up at the end of this year, and I turned around and Frida was sitting upright on the bed. The bed is right here behind me. She was sitting upright on the bed, just perkishly watching me while I did what I was doing. And I flashed back immediately to my girls, to Lucy and Malin, who I came to the same bookcase for 10 years. And I remember it like it was a slideshow, that at the beginning, when we just moved into this room, they would be sitting on the bed and they would be perkishly looking up at me. And I remember just gradually there was less and less perk until finally I'd be late at night or in the middle of the afternoon, I'd be standing at this bookcase perusing these books, and I would look over and they would both be just sound asleep on the bed. Just sound asleep. So let's see here. Oh, okay, all right. This is, we saw Antonia Fraser's editing of The Joys of Reading. This is a similar thing. This is an edition by Anne Fadiman. This is rereadings, in which she talks to a bunch of authors about the joy of rereading. So it's the same thing. It's along the same lines. I also have Anne Fadiman's own book, one of her books on reading, somewhere here. We'll get to it in the course of this. Then we have a fairly new book. This is American Audacity by William Giraldi. This is a series of deadline prose. Don't let the subtitle fool you. In Defense of Literary Daring makes it sound like this is one cohesive pre-thought book, and it is not. It is not at all. The heart and soul of this is periodic deadline prose. Not that I'm degrading it at all. The author, obviously, you can go back to, once you collect all of those pieces, once they revert to you, you can collect all of those pieces and then go back and shape them into anything you like. But the book wouldn't exist without them. That's a popular thing. Authors will often try to do that, make it seem like I intended this grand opus on my own anyway, when really no, you were writing about Harriet Beecher Stowe in order to make a pool payment. Oh, okay. This is from mid-century. This is from 1962. This is edited by Reuben Brower and Richard Poirier. This is In Defense of Reading. And it's a collection of literary essays. It's not really in defense of reading. I think there's one essay in here that actually is in defense of reading. Okay, the preface is in defense of reading, and then a lot of these others are just literary essays about everything from Jane Austen to Wallace Stevens. Really good stuff, but again, not what the title seems to imply, that this is a big considered work on the defense of reading. Okay, all right. This is one of the princes of my profession, one of the best of them all. This is the great Cyril Connolly. This is his selected essays, a really good volume that I give away I've given so many copies of this book away to readers, but most especially to book critics. If I find a book critic, especially a working book critic, who hasn't read Cyril Connolly, then I find a copy of this book and give it to them because he's so good. And this has so many of his great pieces in here, including 90 years of novel reviewing, which is probably the highlight of the book for me. It's his sort of send-off to the idea of reviewing novels. And it's hilarious, absolutely hilarious, where he talks about the dangers involved, whether it's that you become bitter and corrosive alcoholic, or that you go native, which means that you start praising everything. And he, at the end, he says, what advice then would I give to someone forced, for no one could be willing, to become a reviewer? Firstly, never praise. Praise dates you. In reviewing a book you like, write for the author. In reviewing any other, write for the public. Read the books you review, but you need only to skim a page to settle on whether or not they're worth reviewing. Never touch novels written by your friends. Remember that the object of the critic is to revenge himself on the creator, and his method must depend on whether the book is good or bad, whether he dare condemn it himself or must lie quiet and let it blow over. Every good reviewer has a subject. He specializes in that subject on which he has not been able to write a book, and his aim is to see that no one else does. He stands behind the ticket queue of fame, banging his rivals on the head as they bend low. When he has laid out enough, he becomes an authority, which is more than they will. And had I stood the climate, this was what I might have been. The problem of retiring age has long been bewildered economists, wandering, as I do now, among other finished critics, broken in health and tempered by the rigors of the service or the censure of authors, publishers, and the public. I can't help wondering, in the shadowy watering places near Portsmouth or in the Riviera that the retired inhabit, if we are really down and out, can a reviewer come back? Is he too old at 25? Could he find a place with younger men in the front lines where they stem the advance of autumn novels or die in harness? I know it is foolish to dream, to think on these possibilities. And yet these secret heartburns are only human. The other day, languishing among the back numbers in a French hotel, I received a letter from New York which almost gave me hope again. When, demanded the writer, when will you tell the public that Mr. Compton Mackenzie, in his last 3 novels, has not only recaptured the prose style of Congreve, but also Congreve's attitude to life? When, I breathed, but there were tears in my eyes. When shall I? That is just vicious. That is just vicious. It's just gorgeous. And if I might add, I think a lot of it is true, and it's more of an endorsement than ever for people not to review novels. There's all sorts of great nonfiction out there, and nonfiction people don't suffer this kind of weird burnout that novel reviewers do. It ages them before their time. It's really not good for you. Although that bit about, can you come back? Can an old reviewer come back? Is exactly what I did. I was a reviewer forever and ever, and I thought an old reviewer couldn't come back. I had this essay in mind when I thought that, and then I did. And I fully intend to die in harness. Okay, this is by Stephen Gilbar. This is another collection of essays. He's the editor, and this is Reading in Bed, all about the glories of reading, all about the joys of reading. This person is in a book-surrounded room with a green lamp-shaded banker's lamp on the nightstand. This is exactly what I have. You can't see it in this room. It's right over there. But that's exactly the setup that I have in here, where I spend so much time. I spend so much time in this little monk cell reading and enjoying the hell out of it. Okay. All right. We saw this author before. Here he is in another book. This is Gilbert Hyatt. This is People's Places and Books, which is just a collection, an anthology of his deadline prose. Very, very good stuff. Very smart. Okay, this is a trade paperback. This still has a pub sheet in it. Not a lot of the books in this bookcase still have pub sheets in them. This came out, the paperback came out in May of this year. This is Talking to Strangers, by Paul Auster, which is a collection of his occasional prose, his book writing and whatnot. And again, he's another example of an author whose prose fiction I can't stand at all, but whose nonfiction I really, really like. Especially his book writing. I never miss it. Okay. This is George Saintsbury. I don't know that his name is going to be very well known to many of you. I have had this for so long. Good Lord. This is a Saintsbury miscellany. He was a book critic and a general public intellectual going on 100 years ago. This thing was printed in 1947. This is a collection of his essays and addresses and whatnot, author profiles and that sort of thing. He's, I believe, totally forgotten, and is one of the many, many authors that you see in this bookshelf tour who will never be reprinted. Who's going to reprint Gilbert Hyatt? The classical tradition, maybe, but his ephemera? No one will ever reprint books, places, people, places, and books or anything else like that. And no one's ever going to reprint Saintsbury again. He is gone. I don't even think among his fans, I don't think there are any Saintsbury fans left, but if there were, I don't even know that they would be able to agree on which book to reprint if you could just pick one. I think he's just completely gone. And that's a shame, because I come to these authors all the time, and he is really, really good to read. Okay, all right. Well, here's an author who's not going anywhere. This is the Library of America volume of Henry James, and this is his book writing, his essays on literature. It's a big, thick volume. I do get a lot of use out of it. Henry James would probably be the foremost example of a writer whose prose, whose fiction, I don't particularly love. I know it's heresy, but I don't particularly love it. But I love his writing on books. Absolutely love it. Another great example of that I assume is in this bookcase somewhere is Edgar Allan Poe. Boston's own Edgar Allan Poe, who... I mean, I know that he's credited with a lot, the founder of the detective story, the founder of science fiction, the founder of the American Gothic, all that sort of stuff. But his book criticism is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Puts Henry James to shame, puts anybody to shame. Just brilliant. And Library of America did a wonderful volume that was all of that stuff. I'm sure that's in this bookcase somewhere. But Henry James, too, I have visited his book essays far more often than I have revisited his novels or his short stories. Far more often. And part of that, I'm perfectly willing to admit that part of that might just be me. I'm not all that big a fan of fiction. I'm not, certainly when you compare it to somebody writing nonfiction or somebody writing nonfiction about books and writing. There's really not any comparison. Oh, okay. This is Stranger Shores. This is J.M. Coetzee. I think we saw this author already. Did we? Yes, we saw Late Essays. He does regular. He's one of the authors that's smart enough, like Updike was in his day, to do regularly books like this, where he collects his deadline prose into a regular collection of books. They should, ideally in this bookcase, they should all be together. But he's actually another example. I loved Waiting for the Barbarians, as anybody did. You know, anybody that I know, anybody with a brain, I think would love that book. But a lot of his other fiction seems to me to be a very good example of what I often described, that a very talented writer sometimes has only one really good novel, really perfectly formed novel inside him, maybe two. And that all the rest of it, you still want to hear from them for their whole career, but you don't want to hear about them writing derivative fiction, misfire fiction. You don't want to do that. Instead, you want to see them write whatever else they're going to do. Coetzee is a perfect example. I think Waiting for the Barbarians is a brilliant novel. I think it's one of the great 20th century novels. But I don't think he's ever written anything else as a novel that comes anywhere close to that book. And I've read them all. It's hard to avoid the idea that maybe he's laboring in the wrong field. But one way or another, I know that his other novels have lots of fans, but I like his book essays better. Okay, here, we mentioned this before. I mentioned this, who did I mention this in connection with? Elizabeth Hardwick. I showed you the New York Review of Books reprint of the collected essays of Elizabeth Hardwick, and then I mentioned that, and then we saw an individual volume of hers, a much older volume of hers called Bartleby in Manhattan, which, you know, the contents of which have been subsumed into the collected essays. But Bartleby in Manhattan, I still have it as a book because it was a moment. It was a conversation across the whole bookish world. It is a wonderful collection on its own, regardless, shaped and collected on its own, regardless of whether or not its individual contents have been moved into some other anthology. And the same thing is true here. I think I even mentioned this. This is Gore Vidal. This is Homage to Daniel Shays collected essays. And later on in this library tour, we're going to see Gore Vidal's enormous book, United States, which has everything that's in here. And lots more. But once again, there's something to be said for curation. There's something to be said for the feel and the moment and the memory of a particular collection, and that this has that in spades. So that's why I have them both. I've had a couple of people over the course of the many decades. I've had a couple of people wonder, well, why do you have this twice? Why don't you just save it all for the one volume? And that's why. And bookish people won't have any trouble understanding that. It's always non-bookish people that ask that question. And then what is this last one? This last one's old. Oh my. Oh, goodness gracious. Oh, goodness gracious. Okay. This is from 1871. This is Yesterdays with Authors by Jim Fields, who was the presiding genius at Ticknor and Fields. He was also the presiding literary genius in Boston in the 19th century in a way that I really can't describe. I could come up with maybe some 20th century equivalents, some people who were, you know, the mainstay, the psychological support of all of their authors, often forwarding an author some money, believing in authors, having a vision not only for the publishing house but also for the country's literature. Maybe Epstein, maybe. One way or another, James Fields, as far as I know, has never had the biography that he richly deserves. He deserves an 800-page biography about all that he was for so many people. There was a bookstore on the corner here in Boston. You can go, you can see the building now. The building is still there, but it's not a bookstore anymore, and it's not certainly anything like what it was. Where authors would show up at all times, readers, the reading public, and Fields was always there. And had a vision for authors, and met and knew and talked to everybody. And that's what this book is. This is one of, I think, 3 books that he did. I don't have any of the others, I don't think. But this is all about authors that he met, that he knew, and talked with. And it is delightful, absolutely delightful. I've often thought, I have biographies of all of these authors that are included in here, at least all the ones who've merited biographies. I have biographies of a lot of them, and I've often thought that if I got rid of all those biographies, I could still do just fine with the portraits that are in this book alone. So there you go. So that was a great shelf. So that is the next shelf in this very bookish part of my library. Sorry about that. I'm going to wrap this up for now and rearrange things just a bit, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.